we're going to talk about Carton. Most of what I'm talking about is me using Carton. However, I'm also abusing Docker in a really, I think, kind of interesting way, and a way that I'm a little ashamed of. And I'm also abusing CircleCI, and so both of those are in the topic. So, good morning, Perl. Today, I want to talk about how you manage dependencies. I have been managing dependencies for various years in various situations. Mostly what I talk about these days is Bugzilla, but I want to mention that I've actually worked on other things before. I've worked on a thing called LAN-POS, which, for the French speakers in the room, I think is an amusing name. This was created by an American, and since we're in Belgium, the translation would be this. But for the English speakers, and since we're in English, of course, it's called the ASS-POS, and which is really funny because you might not know, but POS is frequently an acronym for that, so it's also, well, that, a piece of poo. So packaging, I did packaging when I worked on this point of sale machine. I did Debian packaging, and and there's one more thing. There's some of the worst Perl code that I have ever seen. This is how it rounded numbers. So I did packaging on this thing. I used make Perl, and I made, I think that was something, a couple hundred different packages, things that weren't in Debian at the time, and I needed them. And I did a lot of work on this, but this was all for the developer machines because everyone else was using, well, the production machines. They looked like that, and they ran Red Hat 4, not Red Hat Enterprise Linux 4, like older than that, like Red Hat 4. This was in the early 2000s. And but the cool thing is that somebody else worried about RPMs, so I didn't have to worry about that. I knew about CPAN 2 RPM, but I never had to deal with it. And at the time I was doing this, I was very much in the camp of using the system Perl and using packaging that the system provides for all your Perl modules, even if you have hundreds of them. So then I joined Infinity, and I worked with some really cool superheroes. And at Infinity Day, we didn't use the packaging management for most of the projects that I worked on anyway. We just used CPAN or CPAN-M, and it was really great. I did notice that when I was installing stuff for this work code, that most of the modules came from this man, who cannot be here, but like my first day when I realized I'm installing like 70 things that are all from one person, it was a bit interesting when I made that correlation. But then I started working for Mozilla, and that was really exciting. I really love working for Mozilla. Mozilla is wonderful. I got to work on Bugzilla, which is the bug tracker, and it's incredibly important. And it's difficult to characterize my experiences working at Mozilla on Bugzilla. It's incredibly difficult. It's a whole complicated situation, but it's been fun. So Bugzilla. I'm going to provide a little bit of background about why using Carton for this was an uphill battle. And so I want to talk about my first impressions for using it. My first actual impression for doing Bugzilla 4 years ago was that I had to learn BZR. What the hell is BZR? It was some kind of source control thing. I had to use it for about a year, but we migrated off of that and we're on Git now. The second thing, as a Perl programmer that's had been working for people that do modern Perl stuff, or like Steven, I was this check setup thing that's in the Bugzilla directory, and I was like, what is that? Is that like makefile.pl? No, it's not like makefile.pl. How do we specify dependencies? Bugzilla had its own way of specifying dependencies, which was a constant defined in some module, and it was kind of interesting because it specified the package name, the module name, and also the distribution name. And as far as I know, usually those aren't a one-to-one mapping like in the pause indexer, but most people don't care about the distribution name. They care about they depend on a particular package, and if the package moves between distributions, that's fine. This actually was a problem in Bugzilla when LWP split out some of their modules, but I do rest of it. So the next headache was install module.pl, which was this thing that the documentation recommended to not use, but they still shipped with it. What it was a custom CPAN client. That's actually being generous. It kind of had copy and pasted parts of CPAN PM. And it installed stuff into the directory on the root called lib. So I wanted to point out that the code for Bugzilla, actually still now until Tom submits a patch to me to fix this, is in the root. And everything that every third-party dependency was in lib. Now that is actually kind of backwards, and that is the code that accomplished that. We had a really fun experience with Moo, because back in an older version of Moo thought that all of our code that was like a library, and all of the code in lib was first party, and so warnings and things were turned on the wrong way. That got fixed though. So since then, I've been working on creating new problems, and I think the new problems are good. They're kind of like an investment. You get rid of the old problems and you have new ones. And so the first thing I want to talk about that was a problem that I've solved and created was inconsistent environments. And then we had inconsistent environments for my Bugzilla. The Bugzilla I'm talking about is the install that's bugzilla.mozilla.org, to be clear, but it's most of what I talk about is not important to that. But production runs on CentOS 6. Actually, I think it runs on Red Hat Enterprise Linux 6, but close enough. It uses RPMs, and somebody else built the RPMs. As in my career, that's been the case. So I want to actually thank Fubar, who had been working on Bugzilla RPMs before I came there, and basically knew a lot about what the dependencies were. I think in some cases a bit more than the developers did themselves. So then the developers use Fedora. So if you had you have a VM on your desktop using VirtualBox or VMware, something like that, it would be running Fedora. And this is the other two people that were working on Bugzilla. I think actually sometimes they're using CentOS 7, but Fedora, CentOS 7, not the same as production. But it gets better because the way they install modules, sometimes we install RPMs, and sometimes we use cpanm. Of course, they use cpanm. I think originally they would have to use cpanm by specifying every module, which you could get by repeatedly running check setup and collecting the modules that it requires. At some point, there was a shim to module build, and at that point, they could use cpanm, but it was still kind of really bad. So by the way, continuous integration, we've been running continuous integration tests for a long time, and those ran in CentOS 7, which is good to be one version ahead of your production environment. But then a thing happened. There's this repository called Version Control Tools, which is a bunch of tools related to Firefox development and so on. And a coworker of mine created a testing. Oh, is there a typo there? No, it's not a typo. Created a testing suite to test an application that we were using called Review Board against our Bugzilla, because we had this integration stuff in it. And so he went and he created. We had a Docker container at this time, but he didn't use that. He went and created his own based on Ubuntu 14.04. And then at some point, we also had Amazon Linux, although this has gone away. So we had about 5 different systems, and each of them were installing cpan packages in a different way, including Debian ones, and that was kind of fun. So just to relax for a moment, I didn't actually set out to solve the problem of having a bunch of different environments. Didn't want to solve it. I had a different problem. My problem is that laptops don't like me, and I have hardware failure all the time. Not literally all the time, but like enough that it's been annoying. So, oh snap, my laptop's broke. That's annoying. How long is it going to take me to reinstall Bugzilla? Well, a day or two. About 2 years ago, this would be a true statement. So at some point, I started just using, because we had the module build shim on our own dependency specification, I started using that. And then to get it to work, so I didn't have to modify every file, because at one point I was modifying every file to use local lib, every entry point into the code, which is like every script and every, not every CGI, because we're actually just a mod Perl application that's pretending to be CGI. But yeah, so I tried patching all the files with local lib. That didn't work. I asked, at some point, I do remember asking, can we use local lib? And this is at the time when I was just kind of junior on the team. And I asked, and the answer was pretty much no. So we don't use local lib. So what I did ask is, how about I add the local lib Perl 5 directory to the top of every non-module file? And that patch got applied, so I did that. So we weren't using local lib, but we were loading all of the modules from the local directory, which is the same directory that Carton uses, by the way. I had wanted to use Carton, but I didn't bring it up until much later. So we're not using local lib, but we have local lib Perl 5 in our path. Next thing, I want to bundle. I want every module that I'm using nicely packaged. And I want to use Carton. I've been looking forward to doing this. I had used Carton before, previous to Bugzilla, and I was excited to get back to having like a complete specification of all my dependencies. Which Carton, if you do not what Carton provides, we will have a bit of time for Q&A on that. But anyway, so the Carton documentation disagrees. The Carton documentation says that A, you can't use the system Perl if it's on certain systems. So this basically means Red Hat because they split off core modules. It also says that you can't run it without using Carton exec. And this is also not true, and I think this is known and agreed to not be true. However, A is basically true. Like, you really shouldn't use the system Perl to, if you try to use the system Perl with Carton and install stuff, it's going to get confused and it's going to think modules that are core modules are not core modules, and it's just not going to work. But you can fix this. So what you can do is you can build your own Perl that's the same version as the system one. So this is a script called using Perl build. The script is called build vanilla Perl, which I wrote, and it's a little bit hard to see, but this is taking the Perl version number and running Perl build on whatever that version is, with some flags that I think are vaguely compatible with what the distro I was testing this on worked with. On multiple distros, actually. So then you have this, you have your own Perl. You install Carton into that Perl, and then you have Carton install all of its dependencies, and you have Carton Fatpack itself. That means that the Carton executable gets put into a directory inside the local directory that it manages, and so then you just get rid of all of that. We throw away all of our hopes and dreams, and we start using the system Perl again. So we use the system Perl to reinstall Carton. This time, hold on. Missing a slide. And this time we in the bottom part of this slide, which encapsulates the previous steps, we rerun the Carton install using the Fatpack version. Cache deployment basically prevents it from looking at the internet and only looking at what has already downloaded. So it has that complete specification that it got from the real Perl in the system, not the real Perl, but the Perl that's not messed up. So this is pretty good. This does a bit of annoying steps, though, and I think that it would be frustrating to do this for 5 different systems. So I wondered about abstracting it. I kind of think that we could use something like a function that kind of is a function over the operating system, over the Linux distribution, and the Perl version, and the list of dependencies. And it could spit out what it is. So it would be nice to write such a function. However, it's not really possible, but we have Docker, so we can do something similar to writing a function that operates on a system. I don't know how to do slides, apparently. There we go. So how do we do this? Well, bad form. There we go. I apparently made subslides, and subslides are a thing I don't understand how it works. So I wanted to modify the Dockerfile language. I thought this would have been fun to create like a Dockerfile function that is parameterized over the Git repo, and then when you have that Dockerfile function, you could set up the base system to match whatever production looks like, and then run it. But I didn't actually end up doing that. Like, I thought about it, but I did something kind of worse. I kind of wrapped Docker in Perl. Well, I made a DSL that generates a Docker file, and that lets me use Perl subroutines to have repeatable environments. This is hard to read, but basically the first few lines are all setting up a CentOS 6 environment that matches our production. And then it calls this subroutine down at the bottom to build all of the dependencies. And the Docker file you end up with, you can definitely not read, but I want to show for length it's that. The same thing is possible for Ubuntu. And then the same thing is possible for CentOS 7. And then, so we have these Perl files that generate Docker files. And then, of course, we want to use make to do the build process. So this builds Docker files, and then it builds a Docker container, and then it runs the Docker container, and in running the Docker container, it produces a tarball of all of the dependencies, as previously specified. So then I would just have a target make upload that uploads it to an S3 bucket, each of the tarballs for each of the different systems. And I just need an S3 bucket, and I asked our ops guy, I said, hey, Foobar, would you like to never have to make an RPM for a Perl module again? And wouldn't you know it? Within about 10 minutes, he had me an S3 bucket, and so we do that. We updated the production push scripts to pull down the tarball for every deployment, and that was cool. Now, meanwhile, version control tools, which was using their own thing in Ubuntu, we got them patched to do that. There's the thing there. It made it significantly shorter in lines, but it also made it faster. So the builds for testing the review board stuff, the slowest part was Bugzilla, and the slowest part of that was it building all of the dependencies using cpan-m. It took, I think, 20 minutes, 30 minutes. Basically, I shaved 37 minutes off of their build times. And also, their build stopped breaking when I added new dependencies, which I had never done, but in theory, if I added new dependencies, their stuff would break. It also made our tests run faster, because I upgraded our testing suite from, this sounds weird, but from CentOS 7 to CentOS 6 so that it was actually the same as production, because I couldn't update production, but I could make continuous integration match production. And I think I did Amazon Linux Docker images later after someone else created, there used to be Docker images that matched Amazon Linux, but now there are. And so we shoved 270 modules into one carton, and it fit a bit like a horse in a cup. That's not a metaphor. And that was the first battle. The second result was once I could actually use CPAN modules, we could fight smaller battles and have bigger wins. So, for instance, the time in Moscow was wrong. Our bug tracker is global, and we have users from all over the world, including in Russia. And the time zone changed at some point, and the fix for that was updating date, time zone. So that was good. I also got to use Moo. I used Moo for generating content security policies, and as it is now, my coworkers are starting to write new code that's using Moo and Bugzilla, and they're actually enjoying it, which is really good. We were able to pin DVD MySQL to prevent things from breaking, which happened recently. We upgraded JSON and JSON XS. I realized that we should probably maybe be using cPanel JSON XS, which is on my roadmap. All of that's pretty boring, but basically I could update stuff. And updating stuff was something that I had wanted to do for about this was 2 years ago, so I had been wanting to update stuff for about 2 years. But more exciting than updating stuff is shipping features. So I had a feature request, which was make all the users of Bugzilla hate me by making their passwords harder. And so this was a very important high-level request from important people that wanted to make sure we were secure. So I asked EIS, which is Enterprise Information Security, what do you recommend? How do you want me to make passwords secure? And they recommended a C library. Not recommended, but they said that they were using a C library. And I'm like, oh, cool. Is there a Perl binding for that? And as it turns out, there's a Perl binding for that. It needed an additional feature, which I patched. And I want to thank Sherwin, the author of that module, because I was able to ship a feature that was important to a lot of people in about a month. And that's pretty good. But it's even faster than shipping features faster and being able to use new modules. What's faster than that is having a development environment that you can throw away and recreate as many times as you want. So I, at some point, created a Vagrant install. It was pretty easy to get it going because all the dependencies were already packaged for CentOS 6 for production. So I just made a Vagrant VM that matched production exactly. And that was pretty good. The stats for the previous year, there were about three-ish people contributing on average on a given month to bugzilla.mozilla.org. In the last month, we've had 11. And I think that that's actually really good. Now, I'm a majority of those commits, but the second majority of it is half again as much as well. It's actually a nice curve, what you would expect pretty much. So we're actually pretty darn agile now. We accept pull requests. People can set up dev environments. We've participated in both Outreach and Google Summer of Code, which meant hundreds of new people, not hundreds, but dozens of new people have tried installing it and getting a dev environment working. So we're really happy. Now, the next problem was we have a cloud migration pending. So our current production is CentOS 6 on machines in the data center, and that's got to change pretty soon. And so there are people working on that. And they had some requirements, 12-factor, yada, yada, Batman. but they needed our app to be a Docker container, and they strongly hinted that it should be CircleCI for running our tests and for building a Docker image. So I stared at this task, and I thought, well, this is a good chance to clean up some stuff. So Docker, they were recommending CircleCI, the first version, and they had experience with that. But right as I was doing the CircleCI 2 had come out, and it had a lot of shiny features, including the ability of running Docker containers. It's not literally running inside Docker containers, but you can create and build Docker containers from what amounts to an arbitrary Docker container. And so the YAML that you have to write, because this is all modern, and basically Ingi's YAML language is one of the more popular cloud languages at this point, I think. So here is how we do the build. Notice it sets up a remote Docker environment, and it builds Docker. Everything is fine. You probably want to see what that Docker file looks like. So there's the entirety of the Docker file. Nothing to see there. Very boring. I'm kind of hiding the fact that there is a cutoff by the projector. There is a thing that says from Mozilla B-Team BMO Slim. So BMO Slim is our base image, and I'm obviously eliding a lot of stuff in there, so I should tell you what that looks like. That is this hard-to-read YAML. I wish I could have changed the font colors ahead of time, but this is the steps that are required to build the dependencies. So this is what was previously in the makefile. The makefile, by the way, is gone. We don't use the makefile to do any crazy things. I'm not generating Docker files from Perl anymore either. But these steps run, so let's take a closer look so that you can actually see. The Docker environment gets to be based on an image, which is our base image of CentOS 6. And it runs a set of steps, which you can see in closer detail here. That does a checkout of the code. It installs all of the RPMs, the system-level RPMs like libc stuff. And then it does build, prepare, build stage 1, build stage 2, and then it makes a tarball. So build, prepare. Build, prepare is a simple script that's basically doing the downloading downloading Perl build and Carton, and then it's also compiling those things. So then build stage 1 uses the real Perl, the nice one that we just installed, to do the previously mentioned step. I think the code is a bit cleaner than the old makefile stuff. Build stage 2 is when we remove everything and do that all again. And then this kind of long spiel here is how we package all of that up. I'm actually packaging up a bit of metadata about what system libraries are linked to any shared objects that are in the Perl directory, and I check for that later to prevent the case of a mismatch. In the current case, we could have a mismatch between production and this build environment. In the future, that will be impossible, but at the moment, it's still possible, so I make that check. So this is how we build BMO Slim, which is, once again, you can't see very well, but they will be on the slides. It's based on the Docker image, so I'm running a Docker image for running Docker commands, and then inside there, it's copying, it's untarring the tarball that it had previously built in the other step, and it's putting that in a directory. So Docker workflows have these directories that you can put stuff in and share between build processes. And so technically, I'm still uploading a tarball to S3, but that is for the existing production environment. And if all goes well, I won't have to do that anymore, and the entire build pipeline will be building all the dependencies and just putting them in the container and uploading the container to Docker Hub, and everything will be fine. So build times. There's a bit of a split here that I should explain. So there is the stuff where I'm building and doing the interesting things with Carton is in a repo called BMO Systems. And this is mostly because it takes a lot of time. Technically, I only need one branch of this for the use down here. I only need the CentOS 6 to the BMO Slim pipeline. But that one alone takes 20 minutes. So the dependencies don't change that often. So the dependencies live outside of the master copy of the dependencies is the repo, but there's a cached copy that's in another repo that is generated for each system, because the actual requirements can vary between Ubuntu and CentOS and so on. Like, you don't have this exact same set of dependencies. Also because you don't have the exact same version of Perl. I think there are 3 versions of Perl at play in this arrangement, so they're separate. But when you, as a result of this, the build times for everything else are quite small. I think the longest test is our Selenium test, which is running a full Firefox browser, and that takes a bit more time because it's actually hitting a few, I don't know, hundreds of pages on the thing to make sure it's not broken. Our build time, though, because everything's technically already built, is just a minute, so I kind of like that. I would like to show you one of the bits about this CircleCI thing that is nice. So to spin up our testing environment, I can specify any number or some arbitrarily large number of Docker containers that will be running. So when this is running, we have our code running in one box, one container. We have MySQL, we have Memcache, we have the Selenium thing. Having a container run Selenium is really nice because I don't have to worry about the details of updating that. We used to have all of this run in one container back before we were using Circle, and that was not good. So that said, it's obvious that there's a bit of there must be a manual step between these 2 repositories, because if I just add something to the makefile.pl of Bugzilla, then how does it get into BMO systems and into the multiple files? So I'm going to show you what that looks like. It's still a painful process, but it's not that bad. So for instance, we edit the makefile.pl, adding in the new dependency. And we have to use make. So I run make and with which branch, and set 2 make variables, the branch and the repository that I want it to look at, because obviously it can only have the dependencies for a particular repo at a given time, which does make deploying this a little bit difficult. You have to have some planning. But still, you run that make. It runs and compiles things, creates 2 tarballs. And then I do a commit, and I have a new cpan file for each distribution and a new cpan file.snapshot for each distribution, which those don't change. So the process here is actually feeding back in on itself, because the cpan file, there's an artifact of Carton called the cpan file.snapshot that gets fed back in, which prevents me from upgrading packages unless I explicitly do that. Which is not shown here. There's a separate process for actually upgrading something that's not that bad, and it is documented, but it's still, this is not ideal. But having 5, at this point actually only 2, different systems is also not ideal. So that is the monster. But I wanted to also mention that in that last patch, I'm adding Modulicious as a dependency for my Bugzilla for a couple of reasons. And if this interests anyone and they would like to do things, I'm all ears. And I should have a sufficient amount of time for questions. And I suspect that there should be questions, and I have all of the code opened in my IDE for those. So, questions? Yes?
Last slide, I mean, what are you using Modulicious for?
I'm going to use Modulicious to implement OAuth 2. But I'm also going to have, like, as an endpoint that I can migrate features to. For instance, the next thing I could do is we need to use JWT. I would like to use Mojo JWT for email confirmations instead of the current token system that we're using. So I'll ask myself questions if no one has any questions, but yes? The orchestration is outside of so I just make a application that's roughly 12 factory, and the orchestrator that the other part of the team uses is up to them. I don't think they're using an orchestrator right now, actually. But theoretically it could. I've actually got this running myself on Kubernetes, so it's not hard. It's just not in my responsibilities at the moment. And if you just yell if I don't appear to be noticing that you're asking a question. Yes?
So you server which is based on Neto or server.
Yeah, and this isn't the one that Lee Johnson wrote.
Okay. I wondered if you've seen that. Have you actually played with it yet? Because I've been keen to play with it.
I haven't played with it. I've looked into a proof of concept just using Mojolicious itself, and then I've done another separate proof of concept of tying it to Bugzilla's auth system. So I know that these two things will work, and I haven't played with them together yet. But Lee Johnson's, the fact that he has packaged that up for Mojolicious, and it seems like less work than using the underlying thing, is the reason that I want to depend on Mojolicious, because I don't want to have to do a lot of work. Yep. Are there any questions about? I think that it would be instructive, and I'll just show you. I'm going to show you the entire config file for the entire workflow that generates the Carton files. And how are we on time? What? 10. Perfect. This is exactly the amount of time. I was hoping for a little bit more questions after all of this madness, but this is fine. So we have just under about 200 lines of YAML, the world's best scripting language, and I think that should be visible on the screen. How's that? And a much larger font. Look at that. That's amazing. There we go. Oh. I wish I had a Linux machine in front of me. I would know how to do that then. But then I won't be able to see it. Bingo. And now I need to decrease the font size. OK, so whoops. What was not clear when I elided over this, which I did because I was worried about time, is that each of the, in the current case, you have CentOS and Ubuntu. CentOS and Ubuntu tasks each run, and they deposit something in a workspace. The workspace is shared with the upload task, and then the upload task just uploads the tarballs to an S3 bucket. Specified in the bottom of this is basically the relationship between each of the tasks. And as you can see here, the tasks are also filtered on only certain branches, so we only look at the master branch. And the jobs that get executed are as follows. Oh, wait, that's for builders. So we have also builders, which is something you don't need to worry about. No one should use that. That's actually, so builders is a hack to make it so that I don't have to always reinstall everything when generating a new CPAN file and a new CPAN file.snapshot. But in an ideal situation, you will only have one environment, and you won't have different environments to do. Okay, by the way, if you are doing this, as of last week, CentOS 7, when you are installing it on, when you are using it on CircleCI, will break because of some bug in the way they're running Docker. So if you need to do a yum update in a CentOS 7 environment, you should do that and build your own Docker, build that, name it, and upload it to Docker Hub and use that, because running the yum update inside CircleCI will just crash. But there's everything. These, I actually kept the existing, when I did this, I kept the existing CI Docker container around, which was called BMO CI. I basically had no interruption of service while doing this. We just eventually turned off the old CI and turned on the new CI. But all of that can go away now as well. So there's really just 3 containers in play, 3 build processes in play in here. If there are no other questions, then I think I am going to be done. There's literally no other questions. No other questions about the Docker file language either.